Everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Thriving North Bay Entrepreneurial Ecosystem and how to tap into it, our program with the Business Edge Briefing Series. My name is Denise Lucy, and I am so happy to welcome you today. Dominican University of California's Institute for Leadership Studies and the North Bay Leadership Council, we've partnered together for about a decade, offering the Business Edge Briefing Series. Together, we welcome business owners and organizational leaders to share business strategies and techniques to be competitive and resilient in the domestic and global marketplaces. Our goals for these briefings are to ignite innovation, inspire creativity, and increase profits and productivity. Our speakers are engaging and recognized experts who inspire business leaders to thrive in good times and in bad. And our program is in partnership with several community groups, which are the San Rafael Chamber of Commerce. Love to welcome Karen Strolia as our new president and CEO. Our chamber is one of Marin County's leading business advocates, and its members, the chamber leads to resources, relationships, and results. It's just a terrific chamber. Our partners on campus are the Dominican's Borowski School of Business Partners, the U.S. Commercial Service, which has been on our campus for 19 years. It is the lead trade promotion agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Its trade professionals provide counseling and support to help U.S. companies increase sales to new global markets. So if you're interested in exporting your services and your goods, please be in touch with us. We'll connect you to the U.S. Commercial Service. The Marin Small Business Development Center, we call it the SBDC. It has experts that provide no-cost business advising to small businesses in many areas, including e-commerce, social media, how to set that up, pivoting strategies, as well as HR support and more. And these resources are tremendous. It helps you start and scale your business. Please be in touch with us. We'll help you get in touch with Miriam Carell. And our terrific partner for all these years, Cynthia Murray, our newly retired CEO and president of the North Bay Leadership Council. She will introduce our presenter and moderate the Q&A. And we ask that you please enter your questions in the Q&A window so that we can provide you a connection with our speakers. Good morning, Cynthia.
Good morning, Dr. Lucy. How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
Very well, thank you. And welcome all of you to the Thriving North Bay Entrepreneurial Ecosystem and how to tap into it. We have two terrific speakers today, and as Dr. Lucy just said, we'll be taking questions after both of them speak. Please, as you think of them, put your questions into the Q&A, and I will moderate them as best I can. Our first speaker today is Zachary Kushel. He's the founder and managing partner of Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures. Zach's professional experience expands Wall Street, Washington, D.C., and now Silicon Valley, where he has put down firm roots in the North Bay. Prior to founding Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures in April of 2020, Zach served on the executive team at Smith RX, a San Francisco-based startup in the pharmacy benefits management space. And before that, Zach was head of business development at Mill Valley's Glassdoor. He also helped tech icon Cisco build partnerships with the global public sector. Zach has also worked in fixed income sales at Citi's New York City trading floor and has a wide range of political experience that includes the U.S. Senate, the White House, and late Senator John McCain's 2008 campaign for president. Please join me in welcoming Zach Kushel. Good morning, Zach.
Cynthia, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And thank you so much to Dominican University of California, the Institute of Leadership Studies, the North Bay Leadership Council. What a great group of folks we're partnering with on this. And I'm just excited to be here to share more about our growing entrepreneurial ecosystem. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Just give me 1 second here to get those slides up and running. But I'm excited here to talk to everyone more broadly about the ecosystem and also introduce everyone to the work that Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures is doing here in our community. So, before I kind of kick in, I just like to start with this little thought exercise. And the question I pose to everyone is kind of what words come top of mind when you think about the North Bay, when you think about Marin and Sonoma counties, right? My guess is probably wineries or our beautiful coastline or the great outdoors or farm to table. But what about rich with startup companies? My guess is that for most people, that doesn't exactly roll off the tip of the tongue when they think of the North Bay. And what I want to talk about today is that has as much to do with a perception that is frankly inaccurate than it does being grounded in any objective reality about where we are as a community and as a local economy. And I want to talk about some research that our organization conducted a few years back to help ground this discussion today. And we pretended, we had a little fun, and we said, let's just pretend that Marin and Sonoma County, that 101 corridor from Sausalito up to Cloverdale, but the two counties at large, what if we pretended that was the 51st US state? How would that hypothetical 51st US state, how would that state's startup footprint compare, to the rest of the 50 states? And how would that compare to the other economic footprints? And as you can see from a population standpoint, right, Marin and Sonoma are 48th, would be 48 out of 51. GDP-wise, right, we actually have more GDP, almost $50 billion in these two counties than they do in the states of Vermont and Wyoming, which is a pretty crazy stat when you think about it. But what about startups? We went back and looked at the 2010 decade, and we looked at how many quality startups. And for a quality startup, we said a company that raised $1 million or more in equity financing, right? Somebody gave you $1 million, clearly somebody thought this was, a halfway decent idea at least. How would that startup footprint compare in terms of the number of quality startups formed here last decade? And those numbers are actually quite astonishing, right? Marin and Sonoma County last decade would have been home to more quality startups than half of all US states on an absolute basis. And on a per capita basis, this two-county region would have seen more quality startups formed here than all but two US states, California as overall and the state of Massachusetts. So the North Bay is actually rich with startup companies. It's just we haven't really been talking about it because we haven't really told the story about the North Bay startup community. If you look last decade about how many companies less than 10 years old exited, meaning they sold or they IPO'd at a valuation of $100 million or more, right? A successful outcome. There were 11 companies across Marin and Sonoma County that did that had a wildly successful outcome. And many of these companies you see on here are probably not household names that we're all talking about. Moreover, that trend has continued into this decade. So every year since 2020 has seen an additional $100 million plus exit here in the North Bay. Everything from Alexa, an optics company, to Arcturus UAV in the unmanned aerial space, Tibbet Communications in the telecom space, and Laminar just in December, a Santa Rosa-based med device startup company that sold to Johnson & Johnson for $400 million. This is the startup footprint, and this is what's happening here in the community. But that's in spite of us really historically not having a very well-connected or robust, what I call startup ecosystem. So if you look at back to April of 2020, this is kind of what the local startup community looked like. You had all these startup founders operating here, disconnected from each other, and frankly, disconnected with resources in the community potentially that could help them. From a mentorship standpoint, you had former CEOs, former startup founders living in this community, yet not actually connected with and giving back to the next generation of startup founders who want to build that next great North Bay company. From a capital access standpoint, no go-to sources for startup capital. You had no institutional capital, pooled capital dedicated to this region. We have angel investors, and if you're lucky enough to be able to be networked in with angel investors or angel groups, that's great, but no institutional capital designed to go into this community. And then from a startup community standpoint, if you wanted to go have a conversation with the North Bay startup community, there was really nowhere to turn. There was no obvious place that brought this all together. So that was the inspiration behind launching Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures now 4 years ago. And 4 years on, here is what the community looks like today. So from a founder's standpoint, we built what's called the North Bay Founder Network. There's now over 175 founder CEOs of young startup companies that we're working with to support in some capacity. Everything from I'm a week in tinkering in my garage to I've raised $40 million in outside capital and everything in between. From a mentorship standpoint, we have the Executive Network. We are going to announce later this week the launching of the second cohort of executives participating as part of that Executive Network. And that's 26 local former CEOs, former startup founders who want to lean in and give back and pay it forward to the next generation. From a capital standpoint, MSIV Fund 1 is the first regional venture capital fund in our community's history. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but that has now come to fruition. And then from a community standpoint, the community is now united, right? We're doing regular convening for all different players in the local startup community. This is a picture from our first ever in-person gathering, March 2022. We provided a mentorship mixer where local startups and folks that want to mentor local startups could come together and help each other. In May of 2022, we held our first ever startup conference, North Bay Next, right here at Dominican University of California in Angelical Hall. We had over 250 people turn out for this incredible day, and it was so successful we had to do it again. So last year we were up in Sonoma at Sonoma State University. We had over 300 people come out for North Bay Next, and that's continuing. This year we'll be convening on May 1st, our third annual startup conference, which we're very excited about. I mentioned before the Venture Capital Fund, but in December of 2022, we announced the final closing of MSIV Fund 1. This is a $6.6 million investment vehicle, which means I now have, a pot of money and a fiduciary obligation to deploy that money into Marin and Sonoma County's most promising startup companies that had never existed in the history of our community before we succeeded in bringing that fund to life. So far, that fund has made 8 investments in local startup companies. We are writing early stage checks, roughly $350,000 investment checks into early stage startups that we feel like have the potential to be that next great North Bay company. I mentioned that we've made 8 investments over these first 29 months of operations of that investment fund. And it's a very eclectic group of founders and a very eclectic group of companies. So Operate Networks is a cybersecurity company selling their solution to the clean energy industry. Union Credit is a one-click lending marketplace for credit unions to attract new members with their loan offerings. Novi is a raw materials procurement platform with transparency and sustainability front and center. New Retirement's a financial planning software platform that is working to democratize access to financial planning to the masses. Fireside, a company that in some ways only could have been born here in the North Bay, given our history over the last bunch of years, is a software company that sells their tool to fire agencies and communities who are trying to make their communities more resilient to the risks of wildfire. And Fireside builds software that helps communities do that. Pair Up is an AI company based in Sausalito that is working to bring knowledge sharing and human connection to workplaces by leveraging the power of AI. Jump Aero is an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft company building the world's fastest aircraft for first response, for emergency first response. And they want to cover the entire North Bay with 8-minute first response, even our most rural areas, via air. And finally, Finalis is a software platform for boutique investment banks to run their business. And they are working very, very hard to really change the way that private companies transact here in the country. And that's a Marin-based startup company. So the question you might have is, well, this is all great. We're doing all this stuff to help the local startup community, but why is that so important? And the reason is, to look at the North Bay economy, overall. And when we look at many things we have going for us here in the North Bay are going very well. But one of the things that isn't going so well is net new job creation here in the community. So this is the California Jobs Market Briefing Report from 2022. And what it shows is that the North Bay region was dead last compared to the largest regions around the state in terms of job creation here in the state of California. In 2023, a very similar story, right? The North Bay lagging the state of California overall and other regions in terms of job creation. And just to show that this is not an aberration these past 2 years, and that Marin and Sonoma stats aren't getting obfuscated by overall other North Bay counties, when you take Marin and Sonoma out of the North Bay and you compare that to the state of California overall, the first two numbers, 11.9 and 17.6, show that, over the 10-year period from 2012 to 2022, again, Marin and Sonoma lagging the state of California overall, and to show that COVID, right, is not, mucking with that data. Similarly, if you take the pre-COVID data to the post-COVID data, the same story, Marin and Sonoma lagging California overall. And this matters because 64,000 people across the North Bay are living below the federally mandated poverty line. And when you're failing to create jobs at a healthy clip in a community, you're failing to engender an economic multiplier that creates jobs for individuals at all ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, right? Local jobs beget other local jobs. And when you don't have a healthy clip of job creation, you don't have things like economic mobility. You don't have the ability to bring prosperity to folks that haven't already made it in our community. So that is why this is so important. And startups have a unique role to play in that job creation renaissance. This is a report that the US Census Bureau put out in 2022. And what it shows is that almost all of the net new job creation in America over the last 50 years came from startup companies that are defined as being 5 years old or less. Startups have an outsized job to play in terms of creating jobs. So when you put those two pieces together, that we have a need for new job creation in the community, startups have an outsized role to play. The logical conclusion for me is that we need to be better supporting startup companies here in our community if we're going to have a brighter economic future here in the North Bay. Staring that in the face is this this fact, right? That startups only die when founders quit. Building a startup is a very challenging enterprise, and it's a very lonely enterprise. So it's why the community piece of what we're doing is so important. If you take those 8 companies we've invested in, or more broadly, the 175 companies that we're trying to help in any way we can, if they're building as part of community, in touch with other community members, they're that much more likely to persist and ultimately become that next great North Bay company. So we as a community need to come together and better support local startups. That is why we exist. And I'm just, again, so excited to have this platform today to share more about what we're building. We have such an incredible partnership with the LePage Center at Dominican University of California. So I'm excited that my friend and colleague Wayne is going to be speaking next. But also just our partnership with Dominican University of California has been phenomenal. And there are lots of other incredible organizations in the community doing important work. So with that, this is my contact information if anyone wants to get in touch or talk to us about anything we're up to. But I'm going to stop the share, and I know there's going to be time for questions later, but I appreciate the platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was terrific. And yes, please do put your questions in the Q&A. We have another great presenter, Wayne DeFemery, next. Wayne is Professor of Information Science and Entrepreneurship at Dominican, where he also directs the Françoise LePage Center for Global Innovation. Before returning home to Marin in 2022, Wayne, to take up his current position, Wayne spent more than 20 years living and working in South Korea, where he taught Korean literature and the digital humanities at Sogang University. Wayne draws on a deep knowledge of the humanities, cultural studies, cross-cultural communication, design, information science, and artificial intelligence to create information tools and creative workflows that enable insight and entrepreneurial action. As founder and CEO of Tamil Vista Insights, a Marin-based startup, he works to democratize access to artificial intelligence by enabling cultural institutions in Asia to produce their own AI solutions. So excited to hear what you have to say. Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you, Dr. Lucy, and everyone at Dominican for making this possible. I'm really excited to be here. As my introduction suggests, I wear several hats. I'm a local startup founder. I also direct the LePage Center for Global Innovation, and I'm a professor at Dominican. But what I want to talk mostly about today is the Innovation Center and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So what I'd like to do is actually sort of situate the ecosystem, the idea of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how that works with universities. What roles do universities play? What roles do innovation centers play? North Bay. So the LePage Center is quite new. I'm recently returned from Asia. We are focused quite intently on creating meaningful exchange. The center itself is dedicated to entrepreneurial invention, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a second, as well as multi-generational hope. As a kind of founding idea, Francoise LePage wrote this several years ago. Global innovation is a manifestation of hope. It's about business entrepreneurs solving problems more effectively while contributing to the world's progressive realization of human dignity through economic development. This is such a fantastic summarization of so many things that we want to do with business and in economics to create the opportunity for hope. That's, for me anyways, a real core idea of what we're trying to do at the LePage Center. It's also quite deeply tied to very sort of traditional ideas about how entrepreneurship and innovation work in economies. The well-known economist Joseph Schumpeter sort of classically defined the entrepreneur as the sort of driver of economic development. And he makes some interesting and important distinctions between innovation and invention. Doing things differently, that's what he thinks of as innovation. Innovation, he says, consists of giving effect by business action to a particular invention, which has either emerged autonomously or has been made specifically or specially with a view to a given business purpose in response to a given business situation. It's innovations about business. But invention is not always coming from business, although of course businesses can invent as well. The making of invention and the carrying out of corresponding inventions are economically and sociologically, he says, two entirely different things. So this is important for sort of how I think about what we do with the LePage Center. The idea that innovation is doing things differently. It's doing things differently. It's taking an invention and putting it into the economy. It's making it help people. It's enabling invention to sort of get out into the world. By business action. So innovation is giving effect. It's putting things in action, especially particular inventions. So what role does a university play in innovation and entrepreneurship? How might we think about that and think about that a little bit, and I'm going to put my professor hat on here, from a sort of theoretical perspective, but with a little bit of history. There are lots of theories about how innovation works, but one of the stronger ones has to do with notions of clusters of innovation. Why is it that the Silicon Valley became so powerful as a place for innovation? Why is it that the Napa Valley became so important in terms of innovating in terms of wine production and things like that? And scholars have identified some central players. And what I want to point out to everybody in the room now is where universities sit. They sit kind of right at the top. They're a little small, but they're sort of right at the top. You need your entrepreneurs, you need your capital, venture capital investors, and so on and so forth. You need your R&D centers and major corporations, government management, special kinds of professionals. But universities play a key role, especially in entrepreneurial ecosystems. Here's another definition of sort of how we think about, in academia anyways, how entrepreneurial ecosystems work. These are the sort of 7 sort of important aspects that scholars will point out. And what I want to sort of point out is how important universities are to sort of all of these. Universities are listed as sort of number 7, but in fact, they play such a huge role in creating a workforce, in providing support systems for entrepreneurial ecosystems, and of course, education and training, cultural support, and so on and so forth. We only need to look to the Silicon Valley and to Stanford and to Berkeley to understand the deep relationship between the new ideas, the new research, the inventions coming out of these universities to the thriving innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystems in the Silicon Valley. And we at the LePage Center are aiming to do that in the North Bay. All right, so how are we going to do this? What are we working on to sort of make this all happen? The core idea for how the center is trying to facilitate and enliven the entrepreneurial ecosystem is by facilitating exchange. Exchange within and beyond the university. So we at Dominican have 3 colleges, and you would be forgiven if you didn't realize that the 3 colleges actually don't tend to talk to each other. The scientists and the health and natural science school are friends with, but often don't share really well with folks in the humanities, and less even so with the business community. And so the LePage Center connects these different groups of people who are doing really fantastically innovative work in the sciences and in healthcare, in the humanities. And again, going back to Jean-Peter's idea, sort of making, operationalizing inventions so that they come into the world and into the North Bay. How else do we do it? We facilitate exchange by hosting events where we bring, for example, colleagues from MIT to Dominican to have a conference on the business of the humanities. So what exactly is the business of the humanities? And of course, we're playing around with the idea of business here. What's the role of the humanities sort of in the world? What are humanists doing on a daily basis? And then, of course, what's the economic model for the humanities? Why is it working or not working? And so we're going to have business folks debating and discussing with humanists the role of the humanities and the business of the humanities in October. We are innovating in education. We are initiating what we're calling a classroom of the future, and we're actually building stuff. We're taking new tools and we're trying to create an environment at Dominican where students can have that really traditional liberal arts education, that wonderful sort of one-on-one back and forth with professors, while at the same time making use of new technologies. The idea too is to innovate in sort of the economies of higher education, that old business model of sort of butts and seats. How, if we can make new kinds of innovations in classrooms to make that liberal arts education available at distance through different kinds of distance learning, how might we change the business model at Dominican? And this is actually a picture of me essentially in my lab trying to prototype the classroom of the future at Dominican. And then, of course, student exchange. We take students. Last year, I taught a course on innovation and entrepreneurship, global innovation and entrepreneurship. And it was a class where we thought through different theories of innovation, different theories of entrepreneurship, and then we tested them by going abroad and going to a foreign country and seeing if the theories held. We took students to South Korea. We took them to incubators at KAIST, which is the Korea Advanced Institute for Science and Technology. We took them to various startups in Korea, battery companies, to ancient capitals of Korea, like old Korean states, to 8th century temples, 14th century palaces, and of course, into all the markets. And it was transformational. It was real exchange and real change. The students reported just how fantastic they enjoyed the experience. I just got distracted by a note in one of the comments, forgive me. We also facilitate exchange with and within local communities. As Zach was talking about, we have a deep relationship with Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures. We support them, they support us. We have their speakers in our classes. We go to their events. It's a fantastic back and forth. We have the, forgive me, I'm looking through the comments again. Looks like, I just want to make sure, are my slides visible to everybody? I'm sorry to pause.
I'm
Cynthia?
not seeing them right now.
Let me see if I can change that. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's half the presentation, unfortunately, that that didn't come through, but that's okay. So we have a deep partnership, as Denise was suggesting, with the U.S. Commercial Service. Here we had folks from USAID come and meet with local business leaders to discuss opportunities in renewable energy in Africa. And we connect globally with our research partners. We have a fantastic collaboration burgeoning now with the University of Juba in South Sudan, where we have about 60 researchers that we're working with together with the Solbridge University in South Korea, and of course, many researchers at Dominican. We are also plugged into something called the Microeconomics and Competitiveness Affiliate Network. It's an awful name for a really fantastic organization set up initially by Michael Porter at the Harvard Business School. This rich group of institutions and practitioners, business practitioners around the world that meet and connect along with the Babson Collaborative, which also has a really rich network of entrepreneur educators, people who are teaching people how to build businesses. All right, so that's a lot of what we're up to. I hope to have sort of framed what the LePage Center is up to and how it fits into the role that I see for universities and innovation centers in entrepreneurial ecosystems. I hope to encourage you to be part of the meaningful exchange that we're trying to facilitate, so that you can and enable you to plug into the global network of business people and researchers that we're plugged into. Come to events like the ones we have in collaboration with the U.S. Commercial Service. Get involved with Zach and the Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures folks. Get to know our students. They're awesome. They're hungry. They're well trained. They have global experience. Mentor them. Come talk to them in our classes. Hire them. They're like I said, they're hungry and well trained. Support us to help foster innovation in education. Be our guest when MIT comes to town, and we get to discuss sort of back and forth between what is business and what is the business of the humanities. And get to know our scholars. Come if you have a research question or want something answered in relation to business, or of course through the other colleges, anything else. Come and seek us out. We're a resource, and I hope that you will take us up and become part of the exchange, be part of the change that we're trying to create here, because this exchange enables, especially if we can foster entrepreneurial invention and help to do that, there's a chance for real growth, as Zach was talking about, with jobs and other things, for multi-generational hope. And that's made possible. We can really make possible really fantastic economic development here in the North Bay by enabling exchange in innovation and entrepreneurship. And with that, I'll close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wayne, very much. And what we're going to do is share the slides with everyone. So if you didn't get to see what you want or the slides that we missed, we will be able to share them. So we have several questions, but I think it's really important to sort of start up. Zach, you gave a great summary of all the research you did and how the North Bay is a thriving entrepreneurial center, but we could do a lot more. And,
Sure.
and it's sort of an untapped resource. So you sort of went over some of the challenges. If you look at some key things that would need to be different, what would they be, such as policies or better access to capital? Those kinds of things. Do you have like a top three?
Yeah, I think, it's probably no surprise. The two biggest things that startups generally want help with are talent and capital, people and money. And that's what makes a business, especially a young business, go. So I think on the one hand, we've been highly successful in terms of bringing this, first ever regional venture capital funds to the North Bay. But the subtext of my presentation was that, our fund has funded 8 local companies. And over the course of the last 3+ years, we've interacted with, over 200 locally that have been seeking funding. So if there are ways for us to figure out a better way to connect other sources of capital with these local founders, obviously, if we had a much bigger fund, we could play that role directly. But it's why having other groups in the region doing things that are thriving is important. So groups like angel investment groups, like the North Bay Angels, for example, or I know Chris Yolanis from VenturePad is on the call. We don't go near physical space, but having a thriving VenturePad in San Rafael or a thriving, co-working spaces, we believe every single, city in the North Bay should have a very vibrant physical space for founders to operate in. So I think all of that's very important, Cynthia. And I think, the local government does have a role to play there. Quite frankly, neither Marin nor Sonoma County is, in my opinion, spending enough money on local economic development. And then within an economic development bucket, startup attraction, startup support is a sub bucket of a much larger bucket. But I would like to see a much larger effort from government officials. I would like to see the job creation metrics that we talked about be talked about at city council meetings, at boards of supervisor meetings. I just don't think enough folks are talking about this. And I don't think that, quite frankly, when folks go to the polls to reelect our local leaders, if they're making decisions based on how well that politician did in helping spur economic development and job creation. So part of this is raising awareness and raising the temperature on this, not in an adversarial way, but in a collaborative way, so that folks understand if you want to help all the citizens of the North Bay, we need to have quality jobs in the community. And folks commuting to SF every day or working in their house on Zoom does absolutely nothing to create an incremental job for someone else in the community. So that's kind of the types of things we're talking about.
Well, you mentioned that the North Bay is lagging on job creation, and we're also lagging on having skilled workers to fill those jobs if we do create them. So Wayne, when you look at the role of education and the LePage Center, what do you see as far as trying to do a better match on creating students who have the skills, educating those students to fill the jobs that we hope to generate from new startups?
So thanks for the great question. I think the fundamental thing that Dominican is trying to do is, and I need to sort of preface this a little bit and explain a little bit more about Dominican. Dominican is a majority minority serving institution. So most of our students are people of color, and they're coming from diverse backgrounds. These are people who, and many of them are first time to college. These are people who are investing heavily in their educations. And so what we're trying to do is make it so that these students who often are coming from other places to Marin can stay in Marin by working here in Marin. And for that, we need to A, train them up so that they're ready to do that, and B, partner with folks like Zach and his community who are generating jobs that they can fill so that they can be in the community. So I see the role of the LePage Center and Dominican as a kind of pipeline into Marin and good jobs. We need to have students be trained, obviously, well, and they are being trained. And then finding a place for them in a local economy that's growing with jobs that they're well suited for and that are available to them, so that they don't have to go other places, that they don't go down to the South Bay, that they can stay here. So that's what I see the role of the LePage Center being in terms of being sort of fostering on the educational side the entrepreneurial sort of ecosystem that we're trying to build.
There was a question trying to understand more the difference between the Institute for Leadership Studies and the LePage Center, and I believe also Borowski School. Would you just quickly redefine those three things?
Sure. So, and I'll call on Dr. Lucy to sort of define the Institute Leadership Studies sort of programs that she's putting together. But the distinction is the LePage Center is devoted to innovation and global innovation. That's sort of its core mission through exchange and things like that. The Leadership Institute is devoted to leadership, and they're two separate organizations. The LePage Center is actually within the Borowski School of Business, Structurally, it's within the business school. The Institute for Leadership Studies, I believe, is situated outside of the business school, but Dr. Lucy is actually a professor in the business school, so there's a very tight connection between the two. That's maybe a little more institutional history than you wanted, but those are the distinctions. There are two separate organizations within Dominican that work together on a variety of projects, but with different focuses.
Dr. Lucy, I saw you put in the chat the difference, but did you want to add something?
Sure. Yes. Yes. The Institute for Leadership Studies is a center that advances leadership development across organizational levels. Team development, how to be an effective team leader, strategic planning. Our institute has 30 members from across the university. So this is leadership across the disciplines, right? So it's leading change and it's across the disciplines. And I am a professor in the business school, and our institute is in the Borowski School of Business, but it does serve, as does Wayne's Institute, it serves the entire university and community. So we do leadership development, how to be effective team leader and change leader. And that's different from entrepreneurship.
Zach, we're getting a request to get more information about your event coming up. I don't know if it's open to everyone.
Yeah,
or
it is. Thank you. So the event's called North Bay Next. It's our 3rd annual startup conference, trying to bring together the entire startup community. So everything from founders to those mentors to investors to service providers to commercial real estate folks to university leaders. We're very lucky that the LePage Center is a large sponsor of that conference this year. So we're excited to be collaborating with Dominican and LePage on that. But we'll be convening on May 1st. We're expecting over 350 people to come out. I put the link in the website for those interested. But you can just go to northbaynext.com or our website, msivfund.com, and you'll be able to find more information about it. But all are welcome who want to play a role and be a part of this growing community we're building.
So it was fascinating looking at the companies that you showed that have exited and gone on to bigger and better things that are from the North Bay, that most of them, I don't think are even well known here, let alone that they had such success. So it seems like there were certain sectors that stood out more as the kind of businesses that were starting up here. Did I catch something, or was it maybe me?
Well, it's funny, Cynthia. It depends on one's perspective, right? So on the one hand, what they all have in common, maybe this is a non-answer, is that they're all venture investable businesses, meaning, there's lots of incredible businesses being built in the North Bay that, quite frankly, I classify more as local small businesses rather than startup companies. And that's not to say that small business is bad and startups are good or vice versa. I define a startup as a company that will reach a national or international market at scale, and a small business, a company that will reach a local market at scale. So what you see in there, if you go back to the 11 companies we talked about last decade that exited, you had 2 med device companies out of Santa Rosa. You had 2 telecom companies out of Petaluma. You had 2 fintech companies out of Marin, one out of Nevada, one out of San Rafael. You had Crave Beef Jerky out of the Sonoma Valley in the consumer packaged goods, kind of food and beverage space. You had Glassdoor in HR technology. You had Ultragenics in biotech. And you had 2 solar companies, Zep Solar out of San Rafael and Enphase Energy out of Petaluma. So those are wildly different sectors that folks are building in. And the core reason for that, quite honestly, is that nobody generally moves to the North Bay because this is the perfect place to build an XYZ business, maybe say for a winery or a wildfire software company. People generally move here because they want to live here first and foremost. And what that means is that folks are coming here, they're raising families here, they're embedding themselves in the community, and they bring with them 15, 20, 25, 30 years of experience, which uniquely equips them to build a company. So for that reason, we see folks building in every single sector here. It's actually quite remarkable how diverse the sectors are. But when you look at the exits, yes, I mean, there are some commonalities there in terms of, there being a vibrant med device cluster in and around the airport in Santa Rosa. There historically being a vibrant telecom cluster in Petaluma. Marin kind of being home to lots of different software companies over the course of many years. And obviously the biotech cluster as well, which I know you're more than familiar with given your role at MDLC. So that's kind of what we're seeing is continuation of a lot of that.
So tying into that, venture capital was one of the areas that you said we're sort of getting short shrifted on in the North Bay. If you look at two things that I would be curious about, one is the venture capitalists, they have different things they like to invest in at different times. So what are the trends right now in venture capital investing that maybe we could try and do more to get companies, those kind of companies that are attractive to them, started? And second is the whole thing around people of color and how hard it is to get capital just for a small business. Is it even harder to get venture capital if you're in a BIPOC situation?
Yes and yes. So in terms of VC trends, obviously the hot thing right now is AI. And what we've seen is an overall kind of slowdown and cooling off in terms of valuations in the venture capital markets overall. The giant exception to that has been AI, where the good old days are here again, or depending on your perspective, the irresponsible days are here again. So companies with a PowerPoint deck, no product, no revenue, raising money at a 25, 50, $100 million valuation just with an idea. Like that is happening right now in AI, and that's getting funded. So, on the one hand, we could say, oh, the North Bay maybe wants a piece of that. I think from my perspective, there is a bubble, and that's not to say that, the AI wave is not going to be successful and world changing. It's just to say that from an investment standpoint, it's very frothy right now. And as someone who's meeting with many local AI companies, trying to sort through what's what is extremely difficult because there's so much hype around that. So having said that, we did fund an AI company I mentioned called Pair Up, which I'm very excited about. And we're actually deep in diligence on a second AI company based here in the North Bay. So there are some exciting things happening here in that space, absolutely. And it is an exciting time there. On your second question, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely insane if you look traditionally at the amount of venture capital going to certain groups. I mean, the one that always stands out for me is only 2% of venture capital goes to women-led companies, which is a number that has not budged over the past 5 years, and all this attention being paid to that. It's actually, in some ways, gotten even worse. So I think what's interesting, the approach that we're taking here is, and we can do this as a regional fund, is we're going to meet with everybody. The way venture usually works is they only meet with you if you have some warm introduction to those partners. By being a fund that says, yeah, if you're building a local startup, we'll talk to you no matter what. And when you do that, you end up making many more investments than than you might otherwise if you're only just doing the if I haven't known you for 10 years, I won't do it. So it's an important piece of this for us. It's also an important piece that we're not just funding certain types of people. It's important that we are looking at everyone, helping everybody. And, of our 175 founders in our network, we look at these metrics, 35% are companies that are led by women or people of color, which, probably still isn't high enough, to be quite frank, but it's something that we need to make sure we're doing here, that we're building an inclusive startup community, and that cuts in many different directions.
One of the questioners said that it's the second consecutive year that VC money is down. And that's, I guess, true. That's not just looking at the North Bay, but are you also seeing that in the North Bay? That
yeah, for sure. So it's 2023 and the latter half of 2022 were very interesting times to be in this field. So with the banking crisis that precipitated in March of 2023, it really sent a shockwave through the venture markets. So actually, if you look at our fund, we made our first 2023 investment in January, and we did not make another investment until August, right? So there was basically an 8-month period there where we did not make new investments, and that's despite us, having dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings. So overall, 2023 numbers were down. They were down here in the North Bay, but the best way to think about it is it doesn't mean that they're permanently down. It just means that the only people who were out raising capital were folks that really needed to, because the smart founders knew that it was a very uncertain time. So they said, you know what, we're going to wait 6 months, 12 months until the environment's better. So we saw kind of a rebound in Q4 of last year. And I would say the last 6 months have been much busier in terms of the number of companies seeking capital than the previous 9 months were, because again, a lot of folks were sitting that out. So I think we're going to see a big kind of, a big increase of that here in 2024. But obviously, we have an election coming up in November, so there's all these different macro things that we need to pay attention to. You have multiple rate cuts being priced into a record stock market that may or may not be coming, and if they don't come, that you're going to see pullback. So it's still a very uncertain time for markets, I would say, overall.
So we have a question: is there any interest in North Bay startups and cause marketing with nonprofits that have similar corporate values? I've heard that this helps attract investors. Is this true?
I'm not sure I know what that question is referencing. So I think where it's going is there interest in maybe the local nonprofit sector and the local for-profit startup sector collaborating, especially when those startups are building mission-driven enterprises? Is that, Cynthia, you think?
Well, they have cause marketing in quotes, so I think that maybe is more like social impact investing. I'm guessing too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll answer the way where I think it's going. I mean, the answer is, it's an old way of thinking to say if you want to go impact a community or impact a certain public problem, right? The only way or the best way to do that is via a nonprofit, right? I think the social enterprise sector, and MSIV is a social enterprise, meaning we are a private sector company, but we have a dual mandate, double bottom line investing for us, and that double bottom line is local economic development, job creation here in the North Bay. I think that's becoming more and more popular. And because of where we're living, there are so few entrepreneurs operating in and out of the North Bay who are making it their business to say, I want to build a widget 10 cents cheaper than the other person. Everyone is building a mission-driven business in their own right. So I think there is a lot of ability for both local nonprofits, but also folks who care about certain issues, to help advance those issues through local startup companies. I mean, obviously the obvious one is climate tech and green technologies, where there's so many innovative things happening everywhere, but we are also seeing a lot of that here in the community.
Thank you. Wayne, the emphasis on global innovation and entrepreneurship for the LePage Center, how do you see our little piece in the North Bay playing into that global equation?
I think it plays in two different ways, primarily. One, we are, for most people outside of the Bay Area, the place to be. Everyone wants to come here. So if we can figure out how to essentially enable people to get here, get to know us, not just in Silicon Valley, but of course the North Bay, to let people know that there is all sorts of opportunity in the North Bay as well as in Silicon Valley, that the whole essentially Marin Sonoma complements what's going on in Silicon Valley in ways, and actually in other ways even presents more opportunities than the Silicon Valley. I think that's one way to think about global, letting sort of everybody from abroad come here and understand what we're up to. The other thing is that with our connections through the LePage Center and through the university to a global network, we have all sorts of ways for people locally to connect to other markets, to connect to other entrepreneurs, to connect to other innovators and inventors literally around the world. Whether you're talking about South Sudan or South Korea, we're connected. And so the LePage Center, I think, fits in as a global. We basically bring the world to the Bay Area and to the North Bay, and basically enable people here in the Bay Area and the North Bay to go global, to go abroad. Yeah.
When you look globally, are there other centers for entrepreneurship that we could learn from in other parts of the world?
Sure, and they're really diverse. Innovation centers, there are all sorts of different flavors. Everyone actually does it differently, which is, I think, actually perhaps a hallmark of innovation centers. They're all trying to be innovative, so they don't frequently follow other people. But there are some very broad categories of innovation centers. There are what you might think of as tech transfer innovation centers, where they're primarily trying to take patents that are coming out of the university to set those up and monetize them for the university, or to get them into business deals and things like that. There are innovation centers. I mean, most famously, you've got MIT, and the idea there, and for example, part of their innovation center is the Media Center, where they're just coming up with cool new inventions. Like they're just doing really cool scientific and innovative creative thinking for things like that. So there's a really broad spectrum. MIT, of course, is always an inspiration. The stuff at say Berkeley and at Stanford are interesting, but at scales and focused differently than I think we are here at Dominican. They have more capital than us. They can do things that we can't do. And so I think our task at the LePage Center is to sort of figure out what we're really great at. What we're really great at is connecting sort of local community with international communities. We're also great at providing opportunities to students who traditionally have not had them in a place which is full of opportunity with these global opportunities. So that's sort of our core strength. And of course, we take you know, I'm always curious about what other people are doing. So I've taken bits from one group and bits from another group and incorporating it into what we're doing at the LePage Center.
And the programs that you put on, are they on the website, or is there, how would people know what might be there to tap into?
They're on the website, but primarily through me and contacting Dominican. So my contact information is on my slides. Reach out to me individually or anybody at the Borowski School, and we can send you a sort of calendar of events and things like that. Yeah.
And Zach, if people, you shared your contact information, but is there a quick snapshot if somebody was interested in making an investment in your Fund 1, and I'm presuming there's a Fund 2 in the works at some point, what kind of money do they have to first put in, or how does that work?
It's a great question. Per SEC guidelines, I can't comment on any further future fundraising we might be contemplating. But what I can say is that there is a bunch of ways for folks to engage in our community, and folks should, to your point, come out and just get in touch with me directly in terms of ways to plug folks in. I think no matter where you are in this community, I think there's a role for you. Meaning, if you're a startup founder, that's obvious, right? If you've run a startup before, that's more obvious. But if you're interested in working for local startups, like we're building a whole talent community, and we want to help place folks with local companies. We have a startup job board on our website. So msivfund.com, our website, is kind of the hub for it all. And then we have a 2-person team. So it's myself and Elizabeth Murphy, our VP of Community, and her job is to kind of be a professional dot connector of sorts. So between the two of us, hopefully we can get you plugged in. But honestly, Cynthia, the biggest thing for us we found is like 2 people don't scale, right? So it's why we're doing all this convening, because, and Wayne can attest to this, like we had an event where we were trying to get some local startup founders to, you know, to do some stuff with the LePage Center. And, you know, there was 30 there, and we said, hey, who wants to do this thing to help the LePage Center? And within 5 minutes, you know, we had the 5 people, right? So when everyone's in the same room, it's actually quite easy to connect the dots and get people to do stuff. So just encourage you to come out. And again, the May 1st thing is certainly the biggest event we do all year. And it's, you know, I'm biased, but it's the best one. So I would hope everyone can kind of make it and get their eyes open there.
Well, I just want to thank Wayne and Zach so much. This was a terrific presentation, and I'm really excited to see what happens next, because both of you are just filled with potential and opportunity. And thank you so much for being with us today. I also want to thank our partner, Dr. Denise Lucy, and invite you to please join us for the upcoming Leadership Lecture Series, which Dominican presents in partnership with Book Passage. We have Michael, and I'm never going to say this last name right, Antonacci, excuse me for butchering that, on Wednesday, April 17th at 7 p.m. at Dominican, and Amy Tan on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. at Dominican. Thank you all for coming today. We hope you will join us for our next upcoming Business Edge briefing, which we will be sending invitations out to you very soon, and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you all for coming today.